Without further ado, we'll get started. My name is Mandy Aubrey. I'm Director of Business Development for EMEA and APAC, which stands for Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Asia Pacific at Songtrust. I've done the job for about 3 years now. I'm based in the Netherlands. I've worked for, I think, about 13 years now in music publishing, and I still have questions about copyright, even though I've worked for 13 years, because it's a changing thing. I can't think of a better word, but it changes a lot. And I think overall, I've got about 25 years of music industry experience. Before working in music publishing, I worked for Roadrunner. So on the master side, on the heavier side, working with bands like Slipknot and Typo Negative and Nickelback and Soulfly and all that. So that's a little bit about me. Now I'd like to introduce you to Karl. Karl Fowkes is our guest today. And Karl, are you there?
I am there. How are you, Mandy?
I'm good, thank you. Glad that we're started, and you know, this is going to be a really fun subject to talk about with you. Do you want to start by perhaps telling everyone a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Karl Fowkes, entertainment lawyer. A large portion of my practice is, geared toward producers and songwriters, but I also represent recording artists, management companies, labels, things of that nature too. So I'm on all sides of the coin. I'm also a music business professor at Drexel University in Philly and Rowan University in South Jersey. So there I teach music publishing, hip hop culture, entertainment law, things of that nature. And I'm really just excited to be here and just sort of connect the dots for you guys.
Oh, thank you. Well, we're glad you're here too, and that you're so used to explaining this complex matter to many people. So the agenda for today is obviously, first of all, we're going to try and understand exactly what a copyright is and what rights this entitles you to. Then we're going to discuss the situations in which utilizing a copyright office might be of use to your business strategy. And then we're going to learn how your copyright can be impacted by your publishing situation and what important information can help you to make better business decisions. And lastly, we're going to give you a bit of advice, first-hand advice from Karl as to, you know, what's best in terms of managing your copyrights on a day-to-day basis and what tools there are available to help you with that.
Right.
Yeah, so I think we can start with the million-dollar question. What is a copyright, Karl? Go, tell us. What is a copyright?
Yeah, a copyright is a form of protection, and it's grounded in the U.S. Constitution. So, you know, it's a form of intellectual property law, protects original works of authorship, so literary, dramatic, music, poetry, novels. It could be the recorded version, the song. It could be the underlying version of that song, so the beat and the lyrics. It could be architecture. It could be computer software, a multitude of things. So, you know, copyright protects intellectual property, whether it be the song, the underlying, assets of the song, or anything else that's art and original.
And why is it called intellectual property? Even that in itself seems a very complicated term.
Yeah, intellectual property because it's sort of intangible in a lot of ways, right? Property, the way we think of property is a physical item, a house, a phone, but some of this stuff just exists intangibly. So intellectual property is sort of that tag that we throw on it.
Okay, cool. Okay, so what's the difference between publishing and master rights?
Yeah, so I think that this is the most important thing. I think anybody starting off or trying to have a good understanding of the music business needs to understand the difference between the recorded version of a song and the underlying assets of a song. So the recorded version of the song, sound recording, the master, usually that's what the label owns. And if you're not with a label, that's what you own. That's just a recorded version of sheet music and a beat. So lyrics and a beat that's been recorded, that's the sound recording. Now the sheet music and the beat and the underlying composition, that's a totally different right. And over there, that's publishing. So you might own both if you're making the beat and you're owning you wrote the lyrics and then you own the recorded version of that lyrics or of that song. You might own both, but those are two distinct things. Sound recording over here, and on one side, that's the master, that is the recorded version of your music, and on the other side, it is the underlying composition. So the lyrics and the beat. That's another side. So I think you have to understand those starting points.
So are you saying that if I'm in a band and my show is recorded, but I do only covers of another band's works written by that other band, are you saying that there is actually no publishing royalty to be generated for me in that instance? But
that is, yeah, that is exactly correct. So there's a bunch of, I think pop is the best way to pop. That was a good example too, but pop, a lot of times the performer doesn't write the song or produce the beat. So, there's these huge pop records. And if you look at the publishing, it is all the songwriters and all of the, whoever produced that beat. And that might not be the performer. And, so sometimes that happens to be the case.
So if someone has their music up on a distributor, they've distributed their music for streaming, that would be royalties would flow on the recording side, you're saying, but not per se on the publishing side, unless they've signed up for an additional royalty collection stream.
Correct. And there's something called a mechanical royalty, which is a publishing royalty that's generated, anytime a song is streamed online. So, Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal, when that song is streamed, it generates a mechanical royalty. But, we'll get into that probably later. Mechanical royalties have to be collected, and that's a publishing royalty.
Okay, that's good. Well, we don't want to go too deeply into that right now because, as you say, it is something we'll get to later, and it's very complex. But so, what does it mean to have copyrighted works then?
Copyrighted work, that's the protection that the U.S. Copyright Office gives you, right? You apply for a copyright, and the Copyright Office deems that your copyright is original and it's fixed and is worthy of copyright protection. Now you have that ability to, sort of move a little bit more freely, and you have a little bit more protection. And why? The biggest question is, a lot of times people say, well, don't you have the copyright as soon as it's fixed and is written before you even apply for a copyright? It's true. Registration for the copyright is voluntary. Copyright exists from the moment the work is created, but registration is recommended for a number of reasons. Many choose to register their works because, their copyright is public record and they have a certificate of registration. And what that registration means is you're probably eligible for statutory damages and attorney's fees, and if someone was found to be infringing on your work. So it's one of those things where if you have your copyright in place before some sort of damage happens or some sort of liability is created, you have that ability to reap more benefits, statutory damages, and collect attorney's fees.
Yeah, it sounds a bit like insurance, that if you've bought an expensive necklace and then it gets taken from you, you would need to prove that that necklace was yours and that you bought it possibly before the theft took place, basically, if you put it in simple terms like that.
Correct. Yeah. And what that copyright would do is you wouldn't even have to prove that because you already have the copyright.
See, what worries me is that, publishing is quite a difficult subject, right? And, I'm glad that we're talking now and trying to teach people about the importance of copyright early on in their careers. Because what would you do, Karl, as a lawyer, if one of the people you represent, she registered a title upfront, right, before one of your co-writers registered it, but she registered it wrongly. So she had the first registration on file, say at ASCAP or BMI or something, but she'd accidentally, or without meaning to, registered that she controls 60% instead of 50% of the song. What sort of tools could your other writer have at his or her disposal to show that actually that was a mistake, and prove that was too high a claim from the writer who did register 60 and that it should be 50? Do you come across that?
Yeah, I think that's fairly common. I think that's why having a track record of everything that was discussed in writing is important. It doesn't have to necessarily be a split sheet. It could even be via email. A lot of times before a record is released, I'm negotiating with another attorney, and we'll say, all right, fine, let's just have an email chain with the official splits, and we'll send confirmation just in case if something is murky on the back end. We'll be able to look back on that email chain and say, no, we agree. Everyone agreed to these splits. So that's why having a written train of record of what's going on is important. And if you don't have that, it's kind of it's shaky, because if you're deemed a a co-author, it might just be 50-50, and it's one of those things. But ASCAP or BMI normally would like written proof or confirmation from both sides before they alter a registered work. So they might just hold the work for a second until both parties come to that agreement. But you can normally reach out to those performance rights organizations, ASCAP or BMI, and get things cleared up.
Yeah, or the PRS or SACEM or GAMA or any of the international CMOs, which are the organizations just like ASCAP and BMI who collect various rights. But I'm also wondering, it's more than just words, right? We're talking about music. So it's not just infringement about, this title and the split. You also have to prove that the music hasn't been plagiarized, right? Copied it directly. So in my day, showing my age, of course, we used to say, well, all you need to do is to record your song on a cassette. and then, but it always sounded really exciting. And then you put the cassette in an envelope and you'd seal it. And then you'd go to the post office, which people used a lot more then, and you put your stamp on it and you'd send it to yourself. And then you must never, ever open it. And then should there be any contention that song was yours or not, then you have it. I suppose if we move on a few decades, that there are modern equivalents, like you could send an email yourself with the sound file, or you could upload your songs to a public site like YouTube or Vivo and keep the site private instead of public. Are they the some of the solutions that you say to handle actually, not just this song was written 50-50 by you and me, for example, but this is actually what the song sounds like, and someone has taken some of it and and copied it.
Right. I think I want to start off by saying publication is not necessary for copyright protection. And I think a lot of people get that confused. They think you have to write a song and publish it for you to have protection. I mean, obviously what that does is avail your work to the universe and give you more of a stamp that this is the date that I put this work out to the world and I created it, and it gives you a little bit more of a time stamp, but it's not necessary for copyright protection. So publication is not necessary for copyright protection. I want to start with that. Secondly, I do think, and this is going to be funny, but I think publication is your best way to invoke your artwork to the universe, right? I think sometimes artists are worried about other people stealing their work, but there's no better proof than you releasing that music first. And I think songwriters, producers, artists have to worry less about hoarding the music and more so about availing that work to the universe, because that becomes your ultimate stamp. I dropped this song Tuesday, Wednesday, February 12th, 2020. And I put it out on all streaming platforms, and I marketed it, and I put it out on Twitter, Instagram, yada, yada, yada. And then February 30th, April 30th, 2020, someone has a song that sounds very similar. You get to say, I put this out 2 months before. I think people just have to get into a better habit of releasing and publishing music.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm a bit more cynical, Karl, because I just think that there could be people that learn to play the system and they find a song, maybe they hear it in the studio and they then think this will be my tune, and then they know to get it distributed because they have the channels and they put it up before. So, I think that that there are many opportunities and options, but I think the long and the short of it is that, you know, with the speed with which any information on anything travels nowadays, you need to really have your options right and make sure that you're covered as much as you can be.
Yeah, and I also think there's the practical element of it. You know, I think so many people argue about songs sounding similar, but there's only a small bucket of songs that are probably worth the litigation expenses, right? Litigation's expensive. Going to court's expensive. You know, filing for copyright, going to court. You know, those can be time consuming and draining. No one wants to go to litigation. So, you know, I think oftentimes you have to evaluate the cost benefit analysis, and you know, sometimes you just have to bite that bullet. And I think that's also advice I give, you know, in a lot of scenarios, like move on, make another one, keep going, because, you know, you're not going to get that much money, and it's not going to be worth that you know, there's no benefit on the back end.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, let's move on to some of the other subjects that we wanted to cover in the time we have. So you mentioned that there are mechanical and performance royalties. So could you go into a bit more detail about the sort of rights that one earns from the use of the copyright?
Yeah, so, you know, you obviously have the right to reproduce a work. So put it out on, you know, copy it, you know, make one CD, make another CD, make another CD. You can reproduce that work that you created. You all obviously have the right to distribute that work globally, you know, and as it relates to music, you know, that means distribute it, you know, Spotify, Apple, on a plethora of different mediums, perform the work. You know, that means getting out on a concert, performing at an orchestra, make a derivative work. I think that is unique, because in making a derivative work, it could be a remix. It could mean taking parts of a song and kind of making it a new version. That's a definition of derivative. So it is, you having the ability to alter and shift that work into basically a new work based on that original copyright. And then, you know, the right to display publicly, which is pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, thank you. So the next thing that we wanted to talk about is publishing and your copyright. So we already discussed about the US Copyright Office, and I think we can move on from that. But with publishing decisions, how can one make a decision about publishing, and why does one even need to?
Do you mean in regards to splits?
Why do you need to have a publisher in order to help you to collect the rights that have been derived from your copyrights? I hopefully made that a bit clearer.
No, you definitely did. I think it's one of those things where you just have to know where the money's coming from, right? There's mechanical royalties on the publishing side. That's one. There's performance royalties. We just saw that on the last screen. So, you know, ASCAP BMI collects those. There's sync royalties, micro sync royalties, things of that nature, which have to do with video, getting your songs placed on, you know, different video channels, audio visual channels. So those are your main four. You have to know who collects those, right? So BMI, ASCAP, you're not going to go out there and collect from each venue that plays your music. That makes no sense, and it's incredibly impossible. ASCAP, BMI, and all the performance rights organizations already have enough trouble getting all the venues across the United States and bars and hotels to cooperate with the performance royalty. So you're not going to have that ability to do that solo. So that's just the first thing. So you need to sign up with the performance rights organization, whether it be BMI or ASCAP in the States, SOCAN in Canada, and there's a bunch abroad. Then you have the mechanical royalty, which I think is the most important going forward, and I also think it's the most elusive currently. If you're not with a publishing administrator, you're probably not collecting your mechanical royalty, because you're probably not Harry Fowkes probably isn't paying you directly. And I think that's what you have to understand. Harry Fowkes pays that out usually in the United States. And they really don't work with the individual. And it's, so, it becomes almost a thing where you almost have to have someone collecting that for you. And that's just the state of the game right now. So I always recommend early on in your career, aligning yourself with a publishing administration company like a Songtrust. There's other ones out there, and they offer transparency and they help you collect not only nationally but internationally. But yeah.
Yeah, no, it's good you mentioned that, because it's true in the States, the access to the mechanical royalties is particularly troublesome. Internationally, it's a little bit better that the collection societies tend to often cover both the mechanical and the performing rights collections, and the writers get a share of both, so directly. So even if there is a publisher, the writers can have a share. However, it's making sure that the royalty has been brilliantly registered everywhere, which is just, as you say, over and above what a domestic society is really realistically able to do, because the activity of a successful registration directly to all the different collection societies and services worldwide will result in more royalties going into the writer accounts around the world. So that's really the one of the key reasons why it's great to have a global administrator working for you.
Very quickly, I just want to highlight the importance again of the mechanical royalty going forward, especially in the United States. You get a mechanical royalty every time a song is streamed on any platform. So Spotify, Apple, Tidal, Amazon, yada, yada, yada. It's small. It's a small number, but mechanicals are jumping up over the next, within the next 5 years. And the game is so fixed on streaming. It's a calculatable revenue. And I think, as you get bigger publishing records, bigger numbers on streaming platforms, you're going to really want to collect that mechanical royalty.
Yeah, and no amount is too small, right? Do you agree, Karl? It's like, even if you're at the beginning of your career and you say, well, I've only got a few streams, take the money, register, right, and just get it, because you're setting yourself up for whatever the future could be with your your work, and you never know, things can change very quickly. So what does it mean if I forfeit some of my copyright ownership?
For the most part, it's really a scenario where you're likely if you do a publishing deal, right? I think that's probably the most common scenario where you forfeit your copyright ownership. In a publishing deal, you sign with a big publisher. It could be a co-pub deal. You're giving away part of your publishing, which is you're giving away a piece of your copyright ownership. So if you have 100% of your publishing, a publisher will want hard rights, probably forever, in perpetuity. They just want your piece of your publishing, and so they're just going to take that. And,
sorry to interrupt, but just yesterday, I think someone spoke to me and they said, well, this person's offering 2-year term, but they want the copyright for 25 years. I think this is something that many of our listeners will come up against. Can you try to explain what that means and what you mean by in perpetuity, and the difference between the term that might be short, like 2 years, but then the 25-year,
right? So
what does that mean?
Usually what that means is any song or any thing that was released in that 2-year window, they will have, the copyright for 25 years, or at least the ability to collect on publishing for 25 years, which is obviously significant. So you have a 2-year window where you're creating music and you're releasing music, and anything that comes from that 2-year window, they might have a collection period on the back end. That's for a long time, and that's usually a publisher. Administration companies are they just take a percentage of your royalty, and they do not own the royalty, which I think they don't own the copyright, which I think is super huge. I think transparency is important, and so many more creators and songwriters and producers want to have ownership over their art, which I completely agree with. So I think if you want to have ownership over your art, you have to know the difference between a publisher and a publishing administration company, because those two fit in two different spaces.
Yeah, I think it's about whether you can retain control or not, but it's not to say that a traditional publishing deal wouldn't make sense for someone at any point during their career. But my advice is you just have to ask the big question: what is the value that I am being offered of this deal, and what if, right? What if things go differently, or will I be the flavor of the month in 10 years time, and there's still, there's nothing I can do with my copyrights because they're still with the publisher, even though I'm free. Am I free? But on the other hand, a pure admin deal is also very much reliant on the activity. So you need to get the balance between the flexibility and working with the right people, I suppose, and making sure that what you expect will come to pass will. And I think for many people who are just starting out, it's probably a bit too early to I would say, again, a very human reference. You don't often marry someone after only knowing them for a few weeks, right? And, and the ones that you will marry is someone that you think is really the right partner. So if you don't feel 100% sure that that's the right decision, then, an admin deal could be a better situation where you have the flexibility to consider which titles you add. You don't have to pay a lot of money. You're not owing anyone anything. Do you agree with that analogy, or do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I also think it is very important to just understand that publishing is a back-end business. I'll talk about that later. I think a lot of people, you could have a successful record, very successful record right now, but you might not reap the financial rewards from that record for a year. It's just a back-end business. It takes a little bit of time for you to start generating publishing revenue. So with that being said, a lot of people compromise on that and take money up front, and they might be lowballing themselves in terms of what the publishing is actually worth. So you might value money now over money later at this time in your life, but that's a short-term decision with long-term consequences. I think you have to be very thorough in your analysis.
Well, this slide that I just put up, I think that this will be available for people to study in more detail afterwards, but it gives you a little synopsis about, some of the advantages of an administration deal such as Songtrust, which is in red, versus a more traditional publishing deal. Karl, do you want to talk a bit about your firm and what you offer and stuff, and before we move to the questions?
Yeah, I have a couple tips and lessons, and I'll speak briefly about my firm. I'll get through this quick. Like I said earlier, make sure you're collecting your mechanical royalties, the most elusive royalty there is. But I think as we project and as the mechanical royalty rates will continue to rise, it becomes an even more important publishing royalty. So make sure you're collecting that. For bigger placements, whether you're a songwriter or producer, bring your attorney into the picture early. I think a lot of times I get brought in, or an attorney gets brought in after you have agreed to a split. And a lot of times, an experienced manager or experienced artist team will kind of lowball you, knowing that you don't know necessarily what's going on. And you might agree to a split that you think is fair when that's just not the case. So bring your attorney into the picture early so you don't have to settle for less publishing. Sign away your publishing at your own risk. You'll likely never get it back. And that is what it is. I think it's a short-term decision with long-term consequences. You might be willing to compromise on publishing for a window, just to, make sure you are immediately, better now. I get that life is real. Publishing is a back-end business. It will take a while to earn. Never forget that. It's just one of those businesses where it's a steady residual income that fluctuates over time, and you'll have big moments and small moments, but it takes time to earn. And in publishing administration rights are sacred. So if you do choose a publishing administration company, that company has to have the technology and relationships to connect internationally. You will hate to give away your publishing and admin rights to a company who does not have the ability to collect all your royalties. So that's just super important. Lastly, my firm, what I do is, I try to be hands-on as possible. I'm available more so than your typical attorney. I've done bigger deals, I've done small deals, but I like talking strategy because the misconception about the music business is that there's a right or wrong answer. I think true genius is really foresight, having the ability to figure out what's next. So I love working with clients who aren't afraid of the future and, have that ability to want to do innovative things. And that's how I run my practice.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to work. And also, at times in my career, I've come across some bands who wanted to make an admin deal with us in my last company. And in the UK, for example, I think the Musicians Union offers a certain amount of free legal advice for PRS members or something like that. Excuse me if my facts are not 100% right, but I do believe that there is sometimes even a little bit of legal expertise available for people who simply can't afford yet to have a lawyer to advise them. So we've covered everything quite quickly. If you want to learn more about Songtrust, please go to our website because there's a lot of information in our prior webinars about what we do specifically and how we can help you. So, Karl, you ready for some of these great questions we've been getting?
Yes. I also want to say Songtrust is great. I recommend a lot of clients to Songtrust. Their team is so excellent, and they really pride themselves on education and transparency. How can you not respect that, right? A lot of these other companies aren't trying to educate you on publishing. They want you as educated as possible to make sure that you're making the right decision.
Yeah. If you make publishing administration available to anyone and everyone, then we feel it's our duty to also make sure that we're offering the education as well, that people really go in with their eyes open and know what they're doing, and normally they realize that there's nothing to be worried about. With us, it's nice and flexible. So I don't want to miss some of these great questions. I don't know who asked them, so excuse me for not saying who asked, but let me find a good one. Should you copyright and register with ASCAP and BMI if you create beats for sale?
Yes. And you have to, ASCAP or BMI really wouldn't make that much sense if you didn't put them on a Spotify or Apple Music. If you get that beat placed, it's important to definitely register with ASCAP or BMI immediately. But once again, what about that mechanical royalty? You wouldn't be collecting that mechanical royalty, if you signed up only for ASCAP or BMI. So you want to sign up with ASCAP BMI, but remember there's other publishing royalties. And then lastly, it's fair to copyright that underlying beat. But I think to some extent it's only worth copyrighting when that song gets placed or it's hit a certain amount of revenue, just because it can get, copyright isn't the most expensive thing. It can get pricey.
Okay, thank you. So now this question comes up a lot, and it causes a lot of confusion. So we spoke about royalties before, and that there's the royalties in the recording and the royalties in the composition. So this question is, if you're signed to a publishing company, do they collect your mechanicals through Sound Exchange? So you could replace Sound Exchange with PPL or Senna or any of these other neighboring rights. So I think I can just very quickly answer that and just say that's a totally separate additional royalty that is not covered through either the royalties in the composition or the recording. There was one question that I really liked. It was quite far up. 1 second, please. Okay, well, okay. Is there any special info or steps to copyright a remix of a song that has been previously copywritten? Not sure.
It's pretty much the same process. I mean, a remix is a new version. It's a different song. So therefore it would deserve a different copyright as well. Those are two different sound recordings, right? The first sound recording is over here on one side, and then there's a new sound recording version because it's a different song. So if it's a different song with different elements and ingredients, you need a new copyright.
Yeah, having the match between the ISRC, which is the excuse me, the unique identification of a recording, and having that successfully linked to your composition and your writing is really essential in order to collect publishing successfully. We make it quite easy on the Songtrust dashboard that you can literally add your song and then find your recording on Spotify in a few clicks. And that's because so many royalties go astray because of this lack of correct identification between the two. So yeah, definitely just consider it as a new composition, but bear in mind, does one not need to get approval, Karl, for some of a remix though, or not from the original rights holder?
Yeah, I mean, that's whoever owns the sound recording usually is going to be the one who determines whether there will be a remix. So usually that's a label or an independent label, and the artist usually has given up their right to, ownership is usually a work for hire in that scenario. So it's usually the label deciding whether there's going to be a remix or not. And in that producer agreement or that songwriting agreement, more than likely you signed away any right to deny a remix.
Okay, I have another question. So if I am a label and own or have a license on the master, do I have to pay out mechanical royalties from download and stream royalties, or do they pay directly the writers? That's a good one because that comes up often as well. Do you know that, Karl?
I guess I'm having a little bit of trouble with the question. Can you restate that?
I think basically if I rephrase this question as it's been put here, it's about what if you're the label, what do you have to pay yourself the mechanicals? Like, do you have to pay the mechanicals to the MCPSA in the UK in order to receive those mechanicals back because you own them? That's is there a way out? I think there is a certain way to avoid doing that if you feel it, at least in the UK. Maybe you're familiar in the US.
From everything I understand, you always have to pay the minimum statutory rate for mechanical royalties per stream. So yeah, I don't think there's any shirking that you have to do that.
Okay.
And then in terms of the logistics of it, I don't know whether Spotify or your TuneCore or whatever your distributing company takes it out. I do not know that intricate point, but
no.
Yeah.
Well, it is. Yeah, we can look it up to whomever asked that and try to put a more comprehensive help. We have this whole help feature on Songtrust, which we're always trying to answer the questions that people ask. So we'll put that one there. I see this one. If you had lyrics registered a few years ago and no music, would you have to re-register when you do add music? I suppose you would, right, Karl?
Yes.
Yeah, it's different. So I saw one about, it's funny, there's all the questions. Yeah, if you co-wrote a song with someone who passed before you could copyright it, how do you proceed with the copyright? So I suppose this is if in the sad situation that there's, the person you wrote with is no longer there. Yeah, that's difficult, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of an estate question. That's like a loaded legal question, I'll say. But just I think simply, that person's rights usually are passed down to another person or owned by another person at that point. Their estate. Yeah.
Well,
so
I think, probably that's coming back to the good old faithful split sheet. We have some examples on our website where you can just literally, before you leave the studio or having recorded, just try to, agree on the splits if you can. Don't be embarrassed to ask for them and just sign it off because the future is uncertain in every way. So we have 3 more minutes. So I'm going to try and see if there's any questions. Yeah. Do you know anything about handling samples when working with producers? That's quite a general question, but do you have any good advice about that, Karl?
Yeah, I really want to give this advice, and I'll say a lot of samples. Here's the real advice I can give. A lot of samples are handled on the back end, especially if you don't have the money to sort of get that clear them on the front end. Obviously there's two rights that are in play there. You're going to need the whoever owns the master and then the underlying music. That's how you clear a sample. So it's a two-sided process. More than likely, you're not going to have the capability or the financing early on in your career to clear that. So a lot of times what happens is a rapper or an artist or a producer will put that beat up first. And in a producer's case, if that beat gets placed, you tell the label up front, there's a sample, and now you're in business because that label probably has the capabilities to clear that sample. But individuals, it's extremely tough to clear samples. Just the reality of it.
Yeah. So I'll just go very quickly through some quick questions. So what is work for hire? I think that's important that we quickly tackle that because you've mentioned it a few times, Karl. What does it mean if someone agrees to a work for hire in this, within copyright?
Yeah, it's simply a situation where your copyright is not yours from the initial point of conception. It is someone else's, and it's usually that person who you're contracting to. So even if the copyright or if that song was already created, that work for hire, you were transferring and forfeiting any right in that copyright. It's theirs completely.
Yeah, so that's something, it's almost like, you just get paid for the job that you do. And if that song blows up and it's the number one everywhere around the world, someone else will be getting the publishing royalties and all the other income streams from it, I suppose, depending on what the terms are.
Usually work for hires are more so on the master side. And I would never advise any client to give away their publishing for work for hire. I mean, and that's almost really, really shady business. Yeah, that's not good, normal.
Well, yeah, but trying to see both sides, I would say perhaps in the film and TV world, it's quite common that composers,
Correct.
There's a film. And I'm going to finish on a question that I hope will stick with people, which we could replace any PRO with this. Do you need to sign up with PRS if you sign up with Songtrust? So I'm just going to try and say this really succinctly before we say goodbye. There are royalties that a publisher can collect, and there are royalties that will almost always go directly to the writer. And if you're not affiliated to a PRO or perhaps internationally what's called the CMO, Collective Management Organization, you will not be able to access all of the 100% of royalties that are generated. So, on the one hand, Songtrust, for example, is a publishing administrator. That's the service, but you need to be affiliated to a local ASCAP, BMI, PRS in order to access. So, time is it. So thank you so much, Karl. We've got we've got over 200 questions here. So we're going to go through them, listen to how we answered. Perhaps we can elaborate on that as well. Karl, if you think of anything you wanted to say, please don't hesitate to let us know. It's been a joy to speak to you and to benefit from your expertise. Thank you.